Chapter 1. These magic rules apply to any magic game with 2 or more players, including 2-player games and multiplayer games. A 2-player game is a game that begins with only 2 players. A multiplayer game is a game that begins with more than 2 players. To play, each player needs their own deck of traditional magic cards, small items to represent any tokens and counters, and some way to clearly track life totals. In constructed play, a way of playing in which each player creates their own deck ahead of time, each deck has a minimum deck size of 60 cards. A constructed deck may contain any number of basic land cards and no more than 4 of any card with a particular English name other than basic land cards. For the purposes of deck construction, cards with interchangeable names have the same English name. In limited play, a way of playing in which each player gets the same quantity of unopened magic product, such as booster packs, and creates their own deck using only this product and basic land cards, each deck has a minimum deck size of 40 cards. A limited deck may contain as many duplicates of a card as are included with the product. Commander decks are subject to additional deck-building restrictions and requirements. Some formats and casual play variants allow players to use a supplementary deck of non-traditional magic cards. These supplementary decks have their own deck construction rules. Some cards require coins or traditional dice. Some casual variants require additional items, such as specially designated cards, non-traditional magic cards, and specialized dice. Each player may also have a sideboard, which is a group of additional cards the player may use to modify their deck between games of a match. In constructed play, a sideboard may contain no more than 15 cards. The 4-card limit applies to the combined deck and sideboard. In limited play involving individual players, all cards in a player's card pool not included in their deck are in that player's sideboard. In limited play involving the 2-headed giant multiplayer variant, all cards in a team's card pool, but not in either player's deck, are in that team's sideboard. In limited play involving other multiplayer team variants, each card in a team's card pool, but not in any player's deck, is assigned to the sideboard of one of those players. Each player has their own sideboard. Cards may not be transferred between players. If a deck must contain at least a certain number of cards, that number is referred to as a minimum deck size. There is no maximum deck size for non-commander decks. Most Magic tournaments, organized play activities where players compete against other players to win prizes, have additional rules covered in the Magic the Gathering tournament rules. These rules may limit the use of some cards, including barring all cards from some older sets. Tournaments usually consist of a series of matches. A 2-player match usually involves playing until one player has won 2 games. A multiplayer match usually consists of only 1 game. Players can use the Magic Store and event locator at wizards.com/locator to find tournaments in their area. Certain cards are intended for casual play and may have features and text that aren't covered by these rules. These include mystery booster playtest cards, promotional cards, and cards in unsets that were printed with a silver border, and cards in the Unfinity expansion that have an acorn symbol at the bottom of the card. The Magic Golden Rules. Whenever a card's text directly contradicts these rules, the card takes precedence. The card overrides only the rule that applies to that specific situation. The only exception is that a player can concede the game at any time. When a rule or effect allows or directs something to happen, and another effect states that it can't happen, the can't effect takes precedence. Adding abilities to objects and removing abilities from objects don't fall under this rule. Any part of an instruction that's impossible to perform is ignored. In many cases, the card will specify consequences for this. If it doesn't, there's no effect. If multiple players would make choices and/or take actions at the same time, the active player, the player whose turn it is, makes any choices required. Then the next player in turn order, usually the player seated to the active player's left, makes any choices required, followed by the remaining non-active players in turn order. Then the actions happen simultaneously. This rule is often referred to as the active player, non-active player, APNAP order rule. If an effect has each player choose a card in a hidden zone, such as their hand or library, those cards may remain face down as they're chosen. However, each player must clearly indicate which face-down card they are choosing. The player knows the choices made by the previous players when making their choice. If a player would make more than one choice at the same time, the player makes the choices in the order specified. If no order is specified, the player chooses the order. If a choice made by a non-active player causes the active player or a different non-active player earlier in the turn order to have to make a choice, APNAP order is restarted for all outstanding choices. If multiple players would make choices or take actions while starting the game, the starting player is considered the active player and each other player is considered a non-active player. Players. A player is one of the people in the game. The active player is the player whose turn it is. The other players are non-active players. In a two-player game, a player's opponent is the other player. In a multiplayer game between teams, a player's teammates are the other players on their team, and the player's opponents are all players not on their team. A spell or ability may use the term "your team" as shorthand for you and/or your teammates. In a game that isn't a multiplayer game between teams, your team means the same thing as you. Starting the game. At the start of a game, the players determine which one of them will choose who takes the first turn. In the first game of a match, including a single game match, the players may use any mutually agreeable method, flipping a coin, rolling dice, etc., to do so. In a match of several games, the loser of the previous game chooses who takes the first turn. If the previous game was a draw, the player who made the choice in that game makes the choice in this game. The player chosen to take the first turn is the starting player. The game's default turn order begins with the starting player and proceeds clockwise. In a game using the shared team turns option, there is a starting team rather than a starting player. In an arch-enemy game, these methods aren't used to determine who takes the first turn. Rather, the arch-enemy takes the first turn. One card, Power Play, states that its controller is the starting player. This effect applies after this determination has happened and supersedes these methods. Some games require additional steps that are taken after the starting player has been determined. If any players are using sideboards or cards being represented by substitute cards, those cards are set aside. After this happens, each player's deck is considered their starting deck. If any players wish to reveal a card with a companion ability that they own from outside the game, they may do so. A player may reveal no more than one card this way, and they may do so only if their deck fulfills the condition of that card's companion ability. the revealed card remains outside the game. In a commander game, each player puts their commander from their deck face up into the command zone. In a constructed game, each player playing with sticker sheets reveals all of their sticker sheets and chooses 3 of them at random. In a limited game, each player chooses up to 3 sticker sheets from among those in the sealed product they opened and reveals them. In either case, that player has access to only the stickers on the chosen sheets during the game, and those sticker sheets remain revealed. In a conspiracy draft game, each player puts any number of conspiracy cards from their sideboard into the command zone. After the starting player has been determined, and any additional steps performed, each player shuffles their deck so that the cards are in a random order. Each player may then shuffle or cut their opponent's decks. The players' decks become their libraries. In a game using 1 or more supplementary decks of non-traditional cards, see Rule 100.2d, each supplementary deck's owner shuffles it so the cards are in a random order. Each player may then shuffle or cut their opponent's supplementary decks. Each player begins the game with a starting life total of 20. Some variant games have different starting life totals. In a 2-headed giant game, each team's starting life total is 30. In a Vanguard game, each player's starting life total is 20 plus or minus the life modifier of their Vanguard card. In a Commander game, each player's starting life total is 40. In a 2-player Brawl game, each player's starting life total is 25. In a multiplayer Brawl game, each player's starting life total is 30. In an Archenemy game, the Archenemy's starting life total is 40. Each player draws a number of cards equal to their starting hand size, which is normally 7. Some effects can modify a player's starting hand size. A player who is dissatisfied with their initial hand may take a mulligan. First, the starting player declares whether they will take a mulligan. Then, each other player, in turn order, does the same. Once each player has made a declaration, all players who decided to take mulligans do so at the same time. To take a mulligan, a player shuffles the cards in their hand back into their library, draws a new hand of cards equal to their starting hand size, then puts a number of those cards equal to the number of times that player has taken a mulligan on the bottom of their library in any order. Once a player chooses not to take a mulligan, the remaining cards become that player's opening hand, and that player may not take any further mulligans. This process is then repeated until no player takes a mulligan. A player can take mulligans until their opening hand would be 0 cards, after which they may not take further mulligans. In a Vanguard game, each player's starting hand size is 7 plus or minus the hand modifier of their Vanguard card. If an effect allows a player to perform an action any time that player could mulligan, the player may perform that action at a time they would declare whether they will take a mulligan. This need not be in the first round of mulligans. Other players may have already made their mulligan declarations by the time the player has the option to perform this action. If the player performs the action, they then declare whether they will take a mulligan. This need not be in the first round of mulligans. Other players may have already made their mulligan declarations by the time the player has the option to perform this action. If the player performs the action, they then declare whether they will take a mulligan. In a multiplayer game and in any brawl game, The first mulligan a player takes doesn't count toward the number of cards that player will put on the bottom of their library, or the number of mulligans that player may take. Subsequent mulligans are counted toward these numbers as normal. In a multiplayer game using the shared team turns option, first, each player on the starting team declares whether that player will take a mulligan. Then the players on each other team, in turn order, do the same. Teammates may consult while making their decisions. Then, all mulligans are taken at the same time. A player may take a mulligan even after a teammate has decided to keep their opening hand. Some cards allow a player to take actions with them from their opening hand. Once the mulligan process is complete, the starting player may take any such actions in any order. Then, each other player in turn order may do the same. If a card allows a player to begin the game with that card on the battlefield, the player taking this action puts that card onto the battlefield. If a card allows a player to reveal it from their opening hand, the player taking this action does so. The card remains revealed until the first turn begins. Each card may be revealed this way only once. In a multiplayer game using the shared team turns option, first, each player on the starting team, in whatever order that team likes, may take such actions. Teammates may consult while making their decisions. Then, each player on each other team in turn order does the same. In a plane chase game, the starting player moves the top card of their planar deck off that planar deck and turns it face up. If it's a phenomenon card, the player puts that card on the bottom of their planar deck and repeats this process until a plane card is turned face up. The face-up plane card becomes the starting plane. The starting player takes their first turn. In a two-player game, the player who plays first skips the draw step of their first turn. In a two-headed giant game, the team who plays first skips the draw step of their first turn. In all other multiplayer games, no player skips the draw step of their first turn. Ending the game. A game ends immediately when a player wins, when the game is a draw, or when the game is restarted. There are several ways to win the game. A player still in the game wins the game if that player's opponents have all left the game. This happens immediately and overrides all effects that would preclude that player from winning the game. An effect may state that a player wins the game. In a multiplayer game between teams, a team with at least one player still in the game wins the game if all other teams have left the game. Each player on the winning team wins the game, even if one or more of those players had previously lost that game. In an Emperor game, a team wins the game if its Emperor wins the game. There are several ways to lose the game. A player can concede the game at any time. A player who concedes leaves the game immediately. That player loses the game. If a player's life total is 0 or less, that player loses the game the next time a player would receive priority. If a player is required to draw more cards than are left in their library, they draw the remaining cards and then lose the game the next time a player would receive priority. If a player has 10 or more poison counters, that player loses the game the next time a player would receive priority. An effect may state that a player loses the game. If a player would both win and lose the game simultaneously, that player loses the game. In a multiplayer game between teams, a team loses the game if all players on that team have lost the game. In a multiplayer game using the limited range of influence option, an effect that states that a player wins the game instead causes all of that player's opponents within the player's range of influence to lose the game. This may not cause the game to end. In an Emperor game, a team loses the game if its Emperor loses the game. In a Commander game, A player who's been dealt 21 or more combat damage by the same commander over the course of the game loses the game. In a tournament, a player may lose the game as a result of a penalty given by a judge. There are several ways for the game to be a draw. If all the players remaining in a game lose simultaneously, the game is a draw. If a game that's not using the limited range of influence option, including a two-player game, somehow enters a loop of mandatory actions repeating a sequence of events with no way to stop, the game is a draw. Loops that contain an optional action don't result in a draw. An effect may state that the game is a draw. In a multiplayer game between teams, the game is a draw if all remaining teams lose simultaneously. In a multiplayer game using the limited range of influence option, the effect of a spell or ability that states that the game is a draw causes the game to be a draw for that spell or ability's controller and all players within their range of influence. Only those players leave the game. The game continues for all other players. In a multiplayer game using the limited range of influence option, if the game somehow enters a loop of mandatory actions, repeating a sequence of events with no way to stop, the game is a draw for each player who controls an object that's involved in that loop, as well as for each player within the range of influence of any of those players. Only those players leave the game. The game continues for all other players. In a multiplayer game between teams, the game is a draw for a team if the game is a draw for all remaining players on that team. In the Emperor variant, the game is a draw for a team if the game is a draw for its Emperor. In a tournament, all players in the game may agree to an intentional draw. If a player loses the game, that player leaves the game. If the game is a draw for a player, that player leaves the game. The multiplayer rules handle what happens when a player leaves the game. One card, Karn Liberated, restarts the game. All players still in the game when it restarts then immediately begin a new game. Colors. There are 5 colors in the Magic game: white, blue, black, red, and green. An object can be one or more of the 5 colors, or it can be no color at all. An object is the color or colors of the mana symbols in its mana cost, regardless of the color of its frame. An object's color or colors may also be defined by a color indicator or a characteristic defining ability. A monocolored object is exactly one of the 5 colors. A multicolored object is 2 or more of the 5 colors. A colorless object has no color. Effects may change an object's color or give a color to a colorless object. If an effect gives an object a new color, the new color replaces all previous colors the object had, unless the effect said the object became that color in addition to its other colors. Effects may also make a colored object become colorless. If a player is asked to choose a color, they must choose one of the 5 colors. Multicolored is not a color, neither is colorless. If an effect refers to a color pair, it means exactly 2 of the 5 colors. There are 10 color pairs: white and blue, white and black, blue and black, blue and red, black and red, black and green, red and green, red and white, green and white, and green and blue. Mana. Mana is the primary resource in the game. Players spend mana to pay costs, usually when casting spells and activating abilities. There are 5 colors of mana: white, blue, black, red, and green. There are 6 types of mana: white, blue, black, red, green, and colorless. Mana is represented by mana symbols. Mana symbols also represent mana costs. Mana is produced by the effects of mana abilities. See Rule 605. It may also be produced by the effects of spells, as well as by the effects of abilities that aren't mana abilities. A spell or ability that produces mana instructs a player to add that mana. If mana is produced by a spell, the source of that mana is that spell. If mana is produced by an ability, the source of that mana is the source of that ability. When an effect instructs a player to add mana, that mana goes into a player's mana pool. From there, it can be used to pay costs immediately, or it can stay in the player's mana pool as unspent mana. Each player's mana pool empties at the end of each step and phase, and the player is said to lose this mana. Cards with abilities that produce mana or refer to unspent mana have received errata in the Oracle card reference to no longer explicitly refer to the mana pool. If any mana remains in a player's mana pool after mana is spent to pay a cost, that player announces what mana is still there. If a player passes priority while there is mana in their mana pool, that player announces what mana is there. If an ability would produce one or more mana of an undefined type, it produces no mana instead. Some spells or abilities that produce mana restrict how that mana can be spent, have an additional effect that affects the spell or ability that mana is spent on, or create a delayed triggered ability that triggers when that mana is spent. This doesn't affect the mana's type. Some replacement effects increase the amount of mana produced by a spell or ability. In these cases, any restrictions or additional effects created by the spell or ability will apply to all mana produced. If the spell or ability creates a delayed triggered ability that triggers when the mana is spent, a separate delayed triggered ability is created for each mana produced. If the spell or ability creates a continuous effect or replacement effect if the mana is spent, a separate effect is created once for each mana produced. Some abilities produce mana based on the type of mana another permanent or permanents could produce. The type of mana a permanent could produce at any time includes any type of mana that an ability of that permanent would produce if the ability were to resolve at that time, taking into account any applicable replacement effects in any possible order. Ignore whether any costs of the ability could or could not be paid. If that permanent wouldn't produce any mana under these conditions, or no type of mana can be defined this way, there's no type of mana it could produce. If an effect would add mana represented by a hybrid mana symbol to a player's mana pool, that player chooses one half of that symbol. If a colored half is chosen, one mana of that color is added to that player's mana pool. If a generic half is chosen, an amount of colorless mana represented by that half's number is added to that player's mana pool. If an effect would add mana represented by a generic mana symbol to a player's mana pool, that much colorless mana is added to that player's mana pool. If an effect would add mana represented by one or more snow mana symbols to a player's mana pool, that much colorless mana is added to that player's mana pool. To tap a permanent for mana is to activate a mana ability of that permanent that includes the T symbol in its activation cost. An ability that triggers whenever a permanent is tapped for mana or is tapped for mana of a specified type triggers whenever such a mana ability resolves and produces mana or the specified type of mana. A replacement effect that applies if a permanent is tapped for mana or tapped for mana of a specific type and/or amount modifies the mana production event while such an ability is resolving and producing mana or the specified type and/or amount of mana. One card, Drain Power, causes one player to lose unspent mana and another to add the mana lost this way. Note that these may be the same player. This empties the former player's mana pool and causes the mana emptied this way to be put into the latter player's mana pool. Which permanents, spells, and/or abilities produce that mana are unchanged, as are any restrictions or additional effects associated with any of that mana. Numbers and symbols. The only numbers the Magic game uses are integers. You can't choose a fractional number, deal fractional damage, gain fractional life, and so on. If a spell or ability could generate a fractional number, the spell or ability will tell you whether to round up or down. Most of the time, the Magic game uses only positive numbers and 0. You can't choose a negative number, deal negative damage, gain negative life, and so on. However, it's possible for a gain value, such as a creature's power, to be less than 0. If a calculation or comparison needs to use a negative value, it does so. If a calculation that would determine the result of an effect yields a negative number, 0 is used instead, unless that effect doubles, triples, or sets to a specific value a player's life total or the power and/or toughness of a creature or creature card. If a rule or ability instructs a player to choose any number, that player may choose any positive number or 0. If anything needs to use a number that can't be determined, either as a result or in a calculation, it uses 0 instead. Many objects use the letter X as a placeholder for a number that needs to be determined. Some objects have abilities that define the value of X. The rest let their controller choose the value of X. If a spell or activated ability has a mana cost, alternative cost, additional cost, and/or activation cost with an X, minus X, or X in it, and the value of X isn't defined by the text of that spell or ability, the controller of that spell or ability chooses and announces the value of X as part of casting the spell or activating the ability. See Rule 601, Casting Spells. While a spell is on the stack, any X in its mana cost or in any alternative cost or additional cost it has equals the announced value. While an activated ability is on the stack, any X in its activation cost equals the announced value. If a player is casting a spell that has an X in its mana cost, the value of X isn't defined by the text of that spell, and an effect lets that player cast that spell while paying neither its mana cost nor an alternative cost that includes X, then the only legal choice for X is 0. This doesn't apply to effects that only reduce a cost, even if they reduce it to 0. If a spell or activated ability has an X minus X or X in its cost and or its text, and the value of X is defined by the text of that spell or ability, then that's the value of X while that spell or ability is on the stack. The controller of that spell or ability doesn't get to choose the value. Note that the value of X may change while that spell or ability is on the stack. If a cost associated with a special action, such as a suspend cost or a morph cost, has an X or an X in it, the value of X is chosen by the player taking the special action immediately before they pay that cost. If a spell or ability refers to the X or X in the mana cost, alternative cost, additional cost, or activation cost of another object, any X in that spell or ability's text uses the value of X chosen or defined for the other object. Sometimes, X appears in the text of a spell or ability, but not in a mana cost, alternative cost, additional cost, or activation cost. If the value of X isn't defined, the controller of the spell or ability chooses the value of X at the appropriate time, either as it's put on the stack or as it resolves. If a card in any zone other than the stack has an X in its mana cost, the value of X is treated as 0, even if the value of X is defined somewhere within its text. If an effect instructs a player to pay an object's mana cost that includes X, the value of X is treated as 0 unless the object is a spell on the stack. In that case, the value of X is the value chosen or determined for it as the spell was cast. Normally, all instances of X on an object have the same value at any given time. If an object gains an ability, the value of X within that ability is the value defined by that ability, or 0 if that ability doesn't define a value of X. This may occur with ability adding effects, text changing effects, or copy effects. If an object's activated ability has an X, minus X, or X in its activation cost, the value of X for that ability is independent of any other values of X chosen for that object or for other instances of abilities of that object. If an object's enters the battlefield triggered ability or replacement effect refers to X, and the spell that became that object as it resolved had a value of X chosen for any of its costs, the value of X for that ability is the same as the value of X for that spell, although the value of X for that permanent is 0. If a delayed triggered ability created by a resolving spell or ability refers to X, X is not defined in the text of that triggered ability, and the spell or ability that created it had a value of X chosen for any of its costs. The value of X for the triggered ability is the same as the value of X for the spell or ability that created it. Some objects use the letter Y in addition to the letter X. Y follows the same rules as X. The mana symbols are W, U, B, R, G, and C, The numerical symbols 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. The variable symbol X. The hybrid symbols WU, WB, UB, UR, BR, BG, RG, RW, GW, and GU. The monocolored hybrid symbols 2W, 2U, 2B, 2R, 2round, CW, CU, CB, CR, and CG, the Phyrexian mana symbols WP, UP, BP, RP, and GP, the hybrid Phyrexian symbols WUP, BP, UBP, URP, BRP, BGP, RGP, RWP, GWP, and GUP, and the snow mana symbol S. There are 5 primary colored mana symbols. W is white, U blue, B black, R red, and G green. These symbols are used to represent colored mana and also to represent colored mana in costs. Colored mana in costs can be paid only with the appropriate color of mana. Numerical symbols such as 1 and variable symbols such as X represent generic mana in costs. Generic mana in costs can be paid with any type of mana. The colorless mana symbol C is used to represent 1 colorless mana and also to represent a cost that can be paid only with 1 colorless mana. The symbol 0 represents 0 mana and is used as a placeholder for a cost that can be paid with no resources. A hybrid mana symbol is also a colored mana symbol even if one of its components is colorless. Each one represents a cost that can be paid in one of 2 ways, as represented by the 2 halves of the symbol. A hybrid symbol such as WU can be paid with either white or blue mana, and a monocolored hybrid symbol such as 2B can be paid with either 1 black mana or 2 mana of any type. A hybrid mana symbol is all of its component colors. Phyrexian mana symbols are colored mana symbols. WP is white, UP is blue, BP is black, RP is red, and GP is green. A Phyrexian mana symbol represents a cost that can be paid either with 1 mana of its color or by paying 2 life. There are also 10 hybrid Phyrexian mana symbols. A hybrid Phyrexian mana symbol represents a cost that can be paid with 1 mana of either of its component colors or by paying 2 life. A hybrid Phyrexian mana symbol is both of its component colors. In rules text, the Phyrexian symbol H with no colored background means any of the 15 Phyrexian mana symbols. When used in a cost, the snow mana symbol S represents a cost that can be paid with 1 mana of any type produced by a snow source. Effects that reduce the amount of generic mana you pay don't affect S costs. The S symbol can also be used to refer to mana of any type produced by a snow source spent to pay a cost. Snow is neither a color nor a type of mana. The tap symbol is T. The tap symbol in an activation cost means tap this permanent. A permanent that's already tapped can't be tapped again to pay the cost. A creature's activated ability with the tap symbol in its activation cost can't be activated unless the creature has been under its controller's control continuously since their most recent turn began. The untap symbol is Q. The untap symbol in an activation cost means untap this permanent. A permanent that's already untapped can't be untapped again to pay the cost. A creature's activated ability with the untap symbol in its activation cost can't be activated unless the creature has been under its controller's control continuously since their most recent turn began. Each activated ability of a planeswalker has a loyalty symbol in its cost. Positive loyalty symbols point upward and feature a plus sign followed by a number. Negative loyalty symbols point downward and feature a minus sign followed by a number or an X. Neutral loyalty symbols don't point in either direction and feature a 0. Plus N means put N loyalty counters on this permanent. Minus N means remove N loyalty counters from this permanent. And 0 means put 0 loyalty counters on this permanent. Loyalty symbols may also appear in abilities that modify loyalty costs. The text box of a leveler card contains 2 level symbols, each of which is a keyword ability that represents a static ability. The level symbol includes either a range of numbers, indicated here as N1 minus N2, or a single number followed by a plus sign, indicated here as N3 plus. Any abilities printed within the same text box striation as a level symbol are part of its static ability. The same is true of the power/toughness box printed within that striation, indicated here as P/T. If you enjoyed falling asleep to this video, let me know in the comments if you would like to see more. Thanks for supporting the channel.